Hey, it's Jean Nolan here. One of the most important things in my life is the health and the well-being of my family. And one of the products that we absolutely love to use and have had amazing results with is Z-Stack. It's Dr. Zelenko's Immunobooster, and it really does the job absolutely well. Now, as most of you know, Dr. Zelenko recently passed away, but he's left behind a legacy with Z-Stack and his other products, and also the Dr. Zelenko Freedom Foundation. So every time you purchase Z-Stack to help boost your immune system and the immune system of your family, 10% of the profits will also automatically go to the Freedom Foundation. So I encourage you to check it out, Z-Stack by Dr. Zelenko. Use the link and the coupon code in the description, save, and also help the foundation. Hey, Inspire Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers, it's Jean Nolan here. Thank you so much for tuning in again today. Thank you for liking, for commenting, for sharing, for subscribing, and thank you for hitting the notifications button so you'll get notified about new videos every day. All right, let's dive into it. One of the main questions that we are getting and that we're seeing out there now more than ever is, what the F is actually going on? What is happening? What is unfolding here? And this leads us to a bigger question, is how are we choosing our perspective to view things? So many times, in order to even cope with our realities, individual realities, and our collective reality is to kind of try to stay away from even looking at truth. We're oftentimes boxed in. We're just looking at the little picture ahead of us. Today, we want to take the opportunity to step back for a moment and use the opportunity that time and history grant us to look at the big picture, the bald eagle view. And so I want to move back about 2.5, almost 3 years now, to the early days of 2020. What really happened there? What has unfolded and what has given us this amazing opportunity, a once in a lifetime, once in a generation, maybe even once in many generation opportunity. So in early 2020, what really began is World War III, and I'm going to explain why I believe that's what happened. So as of course we know, in the early days of 2020, what we first had was a short but very intense period of messaging. So we had the messaging that talked about this novel coronavirus. We had images from China. We had experts coming on. We had the media takeover of this topic, and slowly but surely, they were gaining the attention of the viewers. However, there was still some skepticism because in the past we've had these events, we've had Ebola and all the other stuff, and it never really caught on the way they thought it would. So now here in early 2020, we had this concerted effort. Soon after February and March, the big announcements began where world leaders stepped out onto the stage, heads of government, heads of the national health structures, and all of a sudden they said, we got a lockdown, everybody has to stay at home, everybody has to stay apart, families have to stay apart, the elderly have to be separated from their families, nursing homes closing down, hospitals locking their doors. The extent of that was extremely impactful to all sections of society, virtually everywhere in the world. And if you look back now in hindsight, we see how this was an orchestrated, concerted effort. It required clear planning. It required messaging. It required the tools of media, marketing, psychology, because this messaging wasn't drafted by the speechwriters. It wasn't drafted by the politicians. It was drafted by psychologists. Psychologists drafted all the messages for the politicians, for the healthcare system, for the Faucis and all the other people. It was psychologists that did that. And so what then began to unfold is the greatest shock to our system we have experienced in many generations. Streets were empty, cities were empty, supply chains were stopped producing, stopped distributing, stopped delivering, people stopped working, everything came to a complete halt. And fear and panic was distributed 24/7 to the people. Now, let's analyze this from a bird's eye view. Let's look at this so we can see this was the beginning of a war. So what has happened before is what a lot of people have observed and couldn't quite put together. In the years prior to 2020, we've seen huge shifts in the corporations. We had seen year-long stepping down over multiple years, CEOs, board members, all important positions. People were stepping down from their important positions in big corporations at a rate we had never seen before. We had also seen, coincidentally at the same time, people moving into important government positions and appointments that had clear commonalities. They were very much globalists. They were very much connected through the World Economic Forum. A lot of them are graduates of the Young Global Leaders Academy by the World Economic Forum. There's Klaus Schwab out in public praising the World Economic Forum for having penetrated all the cabinets. We have penetrated the world's governments. That's what he says. And in that, there was a preparation. There was a clear preparation. Everything was put in place. People were put in position. This is what happens at war. At war, you position the generals, you position the troops, you position your supply chains, and you get in control of every important part of the infrastructure before you launch the attack. The attack then happened in early 2020, and it was relentless. All of a sudden, you had countries and people that perceived themselves to be free, absolutely controlled by their governments, police out, military out, heavily armed, heavily fined for even going outside. Remember those days. People in Europe that were used to be able to just cross borders because there was the Schengen Agreement that allowed people to move freely between countries in the European Union. All of a sudden, they couldn't even cross the border with a passport and a valid reason. They had to have documents. They had to have important business to attend to. Otherwise, no one was able to move. No one was able to travel. Curfews. Literally, from one moment to the other, we went into a complete dictatorship in most parts of the world. Which is, when we look at it hindsight, this is the beginning of the war. This was the biggest psyop in human history. Of course, the messaging moving forward was very confusing because nothing made sense. Even the healthcare system's experience was questioned in so many ways because everything that they had applied before all of a sudden wasn't valid anymore. They had to follow protocols and procedures that weren't logical from the medical point of view, but they had to do it anyway. They were forced to do it, or they were threatened to lose their jobs. And what has happened over those months and years was that the messaging changed constantly, and it even contradicted itself. And what does that mean? It means that that was on purpose. Why? So we would lose all self-respect and all self-awareness, because when somebody like David Icke beautifully says, when a bureaucrat or politician says this on Monday, and he says, we have scientific evidence, this needs to be done, and 2 weeks later he says the opposite and points to the science, and when we follow along, we lose self-respect because we know it can't be true. It can't be two truths at the same time. So this is where the World War started. However, at the same time, unbeknownst to the people, the revolution had also started. At the same time, the awakening had also started. And people didn't even know they were responding to a worldwide III attack. But all of a sudden, they found themselves with more time. They found themselves in their home. They found themselves researching, trusting their intuition, learning, expanding, meditating, going beyond their perceived boundaries, going beyond their perceived limits. And they were, for the first time, able to see a bigger picture. And so many awakened at a fast and at a profound level. And they came to the conclusion that there was a big psyop going on. They didn't trust the media anymore. They didn't trust their governments. They didn't trust the messaging. They didn't trust the suggestions. They didn't trust the medical interventions that began to happen. Actually, a beautiful awakening began to happen. And so over time, over the months, the conversation shifted online, on social media, big questioning, a big criticism, and asking critical questions, pushing back. People were on the streets, people were having the conversations, channels exploded, citizen reporters and journalists, if you want to call it that, all of that exploded and became exponentially bigger. So now here we are at this point in time. We need to realize we're in the middle of this world war that is being extended and extended on different fields. So of course the battlegrounds, the battlefields keep changing. But what they have done with so much of the legislation around the world, in Central Europe, even here in the States, in many states, with the legislation in Australia, with the legislation in other countries, is they have changed so much so they can use any state of emergency to control the people. You need to look at the legislation that was passed in the last 2 years. That is warfare against the people. You need to look at the definitions of an emergency, of a health crisis. You need to look at newly expanded rights that the World Health Organization has received from your respective governments. You need to look at all these things and realize that is the warfare we find ourselves in. Of course, it has moved to the actual battlefields in the Ukraine. It has moved to the actual battlefields in sabotage and in killing off livestock, in burning down food plants and burning down processing plants, in absolutely interrupting and destroying supply chains, in destroying farming, food production. Look at the Netherlands, huge things going on there, in shutting down economies, in keeping economies in limbo, in destroying the financial system. This all is part of World War III. This war is not necessarily about territory. It is about the most important real estate that there is, your mind and your spirit. That's what they are in for this time around. And it's literally a small group of psychopaths, evil, in a way, evil spiritual, if you will. They are very, very different in who they are and what they are actually. But this small group has spread its tentacles all over the world and is controlling with their arms, with their fingers, is controlling a lot of the power structures. However, the people, the billions of people around the world, we have this amazing opportunity now because, as it's been said before, they stepped into the room. They have showed themselves. They have moved from hiding their agenda to trying to sell their agenda to us. The Great Reset, moving into the Fourth Industrial Revolution, moving into AI, moving into transhumanism, moving into UN Agenda 2030, a social credit system. This is all what they want to do. And we need to get into the bird's eye view very, very often because we can see now exactly what happened in hindsight. What is more important is to realize what the plans are moving forward so we don't just react when they happen, but we can actually take measures before they happen. We can actually make sure their plans don't play out the way they wanted to. We have seen this monkeypox. It hasn't really worked out the way they wanted to. A lot of the things they have added on to the COVID crisis haven't worked because we were diligent, because we were uncovering things before they came out. As we can see with the biologicals, things are also taking a turn, and it is, that's Pandora's box has been opened. We have done a lot of great work and we all need to be proud, but we also need to stay diligent in our work moving forward. This is as much a spiritual as it is a physical operation, but we need to get organized in this. We need to create the community. We need to create the groups because we need to realize we are at war and they are organized. They are strategized. They have plans. They have funds. They will outperform us in those areas, especially when it comes to funding. They have that part of the equation. What we have is the human spirit. What we have is wisdom beyond what they are capable of. What we have is divine connection, consciousness that far exceeds what they are capable of. So it is so important that we take that perspective, move out of our daily life fear-based reactionary state and go into a broader bird's eye view. Meditation is a wonderful way to do that. You step back and you give yourself permission to rise above your current level of perspective. Great decisions are made from greater perspectives. This is what happens. Fear-based decisions will not lead us to victory in this. But if we also don't acknowledge that we are at war, this will also be futile because they can further move in and further advance their plans. And our true strategy really isn't resistance in a classical sense. Yes, it's important to say no. Yes, it's important to say I do not consent and stand in your truth. But more importantly, it's about allowing and about having this zone kind of flow in your life, moving into the right direction. Athletes know this. You're in the zone before your competition, you move into that state, and all of a sudden everything aligns, everything begins to work out. You are in the zone. We need to get in the zone very, very often, create our visions, get together, create our groups and communities, and absolutely increase the strength and the outreach we have, and go into the places we never wanted to go. People didn't want to go into politics. People didn't want to go into these positions. Now is the time to do this. We have to set our boundaries clearly. Also, we need to realize that most countries today, in their respective constitutions, if they even have a valid constitution, do not have a protocol in place that allows the people to actually dismantle their tyrannical government. We do have these processes in place in the American Constitution. Whether it's still intact or not is a very different question. But we have this. We have a process in place. We have an amendment in place that specifically deals with the question, what do we do when the government becomes tyrannical and overbearing? We have precedent in this country, of course. We have precedent in many countries, but precedent in this country of a Declaration of Independence. I won't go into the questions of the validity of this. This is in place in the minds of the people. They've heard about it, read about it, learned about it. So it is still something that is here. But it is important that you realize in your own countries, how can a takeover of power or a take back of power, which means sovereignty returned, reclaimed by the people, how can that happen? And of course, the process here, every active process should be a peaceful process. When you are met with violence, when you are attacked with violence, of course you have a birthright to defend yourself and end that violence by any means necessary. This is a different thing, but proactive actions need to be based on peaceful actions and peaceful plans. Non-violent plans. I strongly believe in that. However, all of this needs to have a defense component to it. Truthfully, the ideal way would be to reclaim the structures and then transform them from within. This is very important. Creating parallel structures as well as reclaiming the existing structures. For us, we believe it's highly important that we realize what state we're in as humanity, because this is a worldwide event. This is a true world war. And just because bombs are not flying everywhere and there's not tanks on the street doesn't mean we're not at war. We are. This is the most sophisticated psyop in human history, I believe. And it's happening right now. And we still have the chance to mitigate the effects of it. I'm not saying we can actually stop everything that's happening. We can't. It's gone too far for too long. Suffering will happen, and large scale disruptions of the most basic fundamental things will happen. At this point, that is clear. How we deal with it and how we move forward is more important than anything else. I believe in you. I believe in your capabilities. I believe in your abilities. I believe in your human spirit and your strength and your knowledge and your wisdom and your intelligence and your ability and your creativity. So many things that I believe in personally. And if we bring this together, we can create something absolutely amazing. Inspired Tribe, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for joining us. We love you. We appreciate you. We'll be back with you again very, very soon.